much of your adult life, or a good portion of it, in the H box, and you were on the blanket protest, and you were in a cell with hunger strikers Thomas McElwee and Bobby Sands. I mean, back then, your feelings were completely different.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that was like then and what those feelings were?
Well, I strongly believed in what we were doing. I believe in the war. I believe it was a just war. I still do. I didn't regret anything or things, you know. It's just that now, as an old man, or an older man, that I see now that it was a waste. It was a waste of lives. It was a waste of the hunger strikers' lives. It was a waste of all the lives, the civilians' lives and stuff. It was a waste. But we've gone from fighting a war, and the path that's been taken now is more or less the same path taken by SDLP. So therefore, what was it all about? And if I had known for 1 second when I was sitting in that cell, or when I was out in the street risking my lives with a rifle as a 16, a 17 and 18-year-old, that I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have thrown stones for it. If I'd have known it was going to end like this, you know, it wasn't worth throwing a stone. But back then we believed when we were doing a standstill reason, who would live in their own excrement, who would take daily beatings and be starved and eat food that you knew was probably contaminated, you know, because there was times we were getting tea and you felt salty tasting it, and he says, you know, you knew what they were doing, like you knew you were urinating and that. But why would we put ourselves through that and suffer it, and suffer the humiliation of mirror searches and forced washing and stuff like that for, you know, I was on the blanket from when I was sentenced to the end. I was about 4 years and 6 months, I think. You know, about 4 years and 4 months. You know, why go through all them years? You know, when we still believed it, and it's just that that was the reasons we done it. And then we had these guys like Bobby Sands and Tom McElwee and other guys, you know. These guys, they kept each other going. It was amazing. The camaraderie was amazing. The way that people like Bobby Sands kept the morale up through stories, through songs and poetry and stuff like that there. And, you know, encouraging other guys to do likewise. And no matter how bad they were at it, you know, and speaking Irish, learning to speak Irish. The H blocks was a one big Gael talk. Even guys who had very little Irish still used it. You know, when the screws couldn't cope with us, they actually brought some guy from the south, and he wasn't very good to try and, you know what I mean, to interpret it, what we were saying. But it was a privilege to be in a cell with Bobby Sands and Tom McElwee. They were different people, two totally different people. Bobby Sands was a thinker. He was somebody that inspired. He was a man who led from the front, like Brendan Hughes. He led from the front, and as he done on the hunger strikes, and he kept up the morale of the men through stories and stuff like that, and poetry, and simply as the fact that he was a guy that would never be broken. And Tom McElwee was a fighter, a hard man with a heart, and he took no nonsense from anybody. When I was in the cell with him, we got more hidings than enough because he just used his fists all the time against the screws and against the blanket early. He refused to give him a full cup of tea. He only half filled the cup, and Tom gave him a hiding. Then when he came back around to collect the dishes, and of course we got a hammer and flat and put on the boards and starved for a week. So it was a costly cup of tea, like, you know, I've never. Probably why I drink coffee now. But as I say, like, he was a gentleman, and he was a great guy. He loved the country life, and he often talked about stories, told me stories. He told me he was engaged to get married and stuff like that at his time, and stuff like that. He hero worshipped Francis Hughes, who was his cousin, and as I say, after he went on hunger strike, before he left the wing, he gave me his rosary beads. I still have them to this day. I took them through the prison system and stuff like that, old wooden rosary beads. And he says, that's all I have to give you. But at the end of the day, he gave his life, and I sat, another set, and we watched men like that walking on the wing for the last time, and they never came back. And when we look at that, and we look at what's going on now, like even politicians, that is no different to what John Hume or John Hume didn't lead people to their deaths. They say they called the ceasefire, and then they called an end of the war, and then proclaimed themselves peacemakers. How can you proclaim yourself a peacemaker if you stop something you were encouraging for a generation? And completely ruin the lives of a generation and stuff like that. Like, okay, it wasn't just there, it was the British Army and stuff like that, but they encouraged a generation to fight a war. It's yet my generation who lost out in their youth and stuff like that, they encouraged that, and then when they ended all that, they proclaimed themselves as peacemakers. And as I say, I look back on that, and it's depressing, and it's the thing, and when you go online, we often go on there like Twitter. When you get these young guys now, most of them's fake names, and they're saying to you about, oh, what do we do then? We continue the war? This seems to be a programmed response. Oh, you want to continue the war, blah, blah. Despite the fact that I've said numerous times that I'm opposed to the war or continuation of the war because of what happened in the past, because I've seen how we were led and people died. And these people became politicians touring the world, being white and dying in the White House and everywhere else, while young men at 16 and 17 is lying up in the assembly. And then you're going on there and you're being accused of wanting to continue the war, despite the fact that they're knowing it. And in our programme response is, what's your alternative? But as a friend of mine says, how can you have an alternative to the lives that were squandered? There's no alternative to that. The alternative was always there. End the war. When I got out of jail in May 1985, I joined Sinn Féin. Came out of jail with ideas we talked about in jail, ideas we talked about during the blanket, about various things to help the people, change things for the life of the people. And I seen for myself that there was no interest. The councillors were getting asked to go to Chantal and stuff like that, and they were laughing at me. There was no interest. They didn't want no interest to do this or anything else. And I just says to myself, no, it's not worth going back to jail for what I'm seeing, stuff like that. And I left Sinn Féin. I left the whole lot behind me, walked away. I met my wife, got married and stuff like that. But I walked away, and stuff like this. But you have to realise at the same time that I walked away, little known to me and a lot of others, there was a thing called the Dairy Project was set in motion, and it was set in motion by two Quakers, and of course it couldn't happen without McGuinness, and it was winding down the war and dairy to see how things goes. And it was noticeable that very few things was happening in the city around that time, about the 86, 87 and on up. It was noticeable that was happening. And then we found out in later years, of course, Devlin and others was sent over to America to wind down Northern. So this was all, the whole thing towards the peace process was getting set in motion. But as I say, I didn't know about the dairy experiment, and I didn't know about this and that. But the fact was, when this was going on, there were still guys dying, guys carrying bombs and stuff like that. They were still dying on the streets, and people were still getting killed on the streets, while they were preparing the way for the slow path to peace. The war was going on through the rest of the north. So what I often look back and say to myself now, and I look back at the guys who died back then, and I say to myself, well, if I had stayed, I could have been dead. I mightn't have made it this far. Could have been dead, and what for? nothing. And as I say, you know, therefore, it was the best decision I ever made. Or else I would have been back in jail, that too. But the death part was, when I look back and I say I could have been killed or dead, you know. When Richard O'Raw brought out his book, Blanket Men.
And Richard's a former IRA prisoner as well.
And he was a PRO during the blanket. He was actually Vic McFarlane's advisor. Vic didn't do nothing without getting advice from Richard. And when he brought out that book, I was in the cell with Richard, or in the wing with Richard. I was in the wing that time with Bobby Sands and Vic McFarlane and the others. And when he brought the book out, and he says that the British had made an offer on or about the 5th of July 1981, and they had looked at the offer coming back, and they had accepted it, and sent word outside that they were accepting the offer to end the hunger strike, and that Adams sent word back in and didn't go far enough. Then, having been on the wing, me and others I spoke to realised, do you remember word went round the wing? The Brits were moving and Joe McDonald's not going to have to die. And then nothing more happened. We all realised this is what was happening. And guys actually came out that was up in the cells beside Vic and Richard and says that's what happened. The two of them agreed out the window in Irish that there was enough there to end it, and they sent word out. That was traumatic, given that I had known Bobby and Tom McElwee. I sent the cell with him, like, you know, when you're living in a cell in your own excrement for that length of time. I was in the cell with Bobby for 3 months, and I was in the cell with Tom for about 7 months. You know, that's a long time when you don't get out of yourself for 24 hours a day and you're living your own excrement and stuff like that. You know each other like brothers. You know everything about each other. You tell each other stories, and that's the only way they pass it out. So, and we had watched these men going out of the wing for the last time and not be returned. And when I realised what they had gone through on the hunger strike, a long drawn out hunger strike, starving, and their families pleading with them not to die, to come off it and stuff like that, watching their mother and their father and their else. You know, I didn't go on, I didn't put my name because I knew I couldn't do it. I couldn't put my family through that. I couldn't put my mother through that. Couldn't break her heart. Slowly break her heart. You know, long drawn out. And these guys done this. They walked and they decided like that they were going to die in a hunger strike, and their family suffered too. We forget that. Their family suffered great. And at the end of the day, after 4 deaths, Thatcher was bit. She had come and she had made an offer which included her own clothes, not as a privilege, as a right. That was on it. Not as a privilege, as a right. And that was always, we've always believed. And I remember going right back to when we were in H6 on the leadership wing, and I remember being told that that's what they were actually, the Dark was discussing when a well-known member of the blanket, that a leading IRA man, left the protest, that it nearly wrecked the blanket. The guys were saying if he can leave, I'm not going to name his name, but if he can leave, we can leave. This guy was up there along with Beck and Bobby Sands and guys like this. We can leave, and the guys was going. You couldn't blame them. I don't blame them. We were going through. But the Dark end says, look, if this keeps going, I guess we end up with 100 men in the corner of the thing, and the hitch blocks, and forgot about it. So they talked about then in 1979 about going on the system and wrecking it done. And the only thing that stopped it was the prison uniform. We simply couldn't wear it. Therefore, if we had got our own clothes at any time, the protest would have ended. And Thatcher was about the 5th of July, and one of the things was our own clothes at all times. We actually got, when the hunger strike ended, and the 3rd of October 1981. 3 days later, we got what they had offered. 3 days later, Prior had given us what had been offered back at that date. You know, so, as I say, this played a lot on my, mind and stuff like this, and it still plays in my mind. It makes me very angry and everything else. And now I'm seeing people saying, this seems to be a thing now, that the sacrifices of the hunger strike left us where we are today, brought us to where we are today. Nobody would have died for that. I wouldn't have thrown stones for it, and I'm certain a man wouldn't have died in hunger strike and put their families through that for what John Hume had already been doing long before that.
Some of the people who died during the hunger strikes, Bobby Sands, Tom McElwee, all Provisional IRA members like yourself, they were your closest friends. I think you even said there that they were closer than a brother because you were sharing a cell with these people.
Yeah.
Did you actually believe that when they went on hunger strike that they were going to die, or did you believe that the British government would have given?
I believe the British government would have given in, especially after maybe 2 deaths or whatever. You know, I always believed that they were giving in, but then the longer it went on, we were starting to say, it doesn't look as this is going to be a long drawn out. You know, this is not going to end, it's never going to end, and stuff like that. But Bobby Sands went on that hunger strike. He went on first because he knew he was going to die. He made Francis Hughes second because he knew he was definitely die. Because effectively what happened during the first hunger strike was, and despite what people's trying to spin it and stuff like that, the first hunger strike ended because 3 men told the Dark they were coming off it. The Dark had promised Sean McKenna wouldn't let him die. Sean was going under a coma. And these key guys in the Dark says, I'm not going to watch Sean McKenna die and then watch the hunger strike fall apart. We all knew that. Spoken to hunger. I thought it was amazing at things when they heard this, seen a document. They seen the document and the Dark ended it. Lawrence McKeown lied when he says that the Dark says, Bobby says the Dark fucked up. That was a lie. Bobby says it was the first hunger strike was a fuck up because there was men on it, wasn't willing to die. And I want to put that record straight because it's been spun and spun, and there's men out there, and I've spoken to former blanket men and men was on the wing. We all know that's what happened during that first hunger strike. As for accepting an offer or a document, Adams wrote himself, and it's there, documentation that Father Mager got the document at Belfast Airport. He brought it to Adams in a house in Belfast, and while Adams was looking at the document, Tom Hartley busts in and says the hunger strike was over. Therefore, Adams was looking at the document, and there was nothing in the document. The document merely says, around a lot of waffle and everything else, it merely says that all prisoners could wear civilian-type clothing during the working week. He didn't renege on that. He gave it in and was thrown back at him. It was another form of prison uniform. You know, and I for years, I ignored all this. But then when Adams and all are starting blaming, and McKeown started blaming the Dark and stuff like this, I says, no, I'm not going to allow this to happen. I'm going to say how it happened and how others know it happened.
The Dark is Brendan Hughes.
Yes.
Who you refer to.
Yeah.
He was another close friend of yours.
Well, I wouldn't say the Dark would have been a close friend. I was on the wing with him since we moved to H6 in February 1979 until he went on the first hunger strike. The Dark was a man we all admired. He was a guy who led from the front at all times. He was a legendary figure in the IRA. He was older than the rest of us. And he had always, inside and out, was a man who didn't ask others to do what he wasn't willing to do himself. Unlike people who claimed that they were never in the IRA. You know, They might as well have not been in there, from what I'm told. But what I'm saying is, the Dark wasn't like that. The Dark, and he was highly respected. He was up there during the blanket protest. It was him and Bobby Sands. They were the two guys we respected because they were the guys that led from the front. You know.
I know you've talked a lot about Bobby Sands during this interview, and you spent a lot of time with him. I mean, what type of person was he?
Bobby Sands was the thinker, and he was a teacher, he was a storyteller, and he was a guild-goer. He was a lot of things for one person. He was a very talented singer. A lot of people have say he sounded like Ross Stewart. I always, although I don't like the man, I think he sung like Bono, you know. And he had a love for all types of music, from the Beatles to traditional music and Gaelic and stuff like that. It was thing, you know. And as I say, he believed in keeping men's minds occupied. He had seemed to have this thing about books that he read. He could remember them, and in a lot of cases he added to them, made parts up to extend them, and he would serialise these books out the door. And you had the likes of Trinity, Billy and Eurus, and his most famous book, Jet. In later years, I tried to find this book, Jet, and I couldn't find it. And Dennis Ahern, who wrote his autobiography, talked about it, and he says they couldn't find it, as our blanket man says. So we came to the belief that Bobby made this story up himself. And Jet was a story. Jet was the initials. This guy was called Jeremiah Eisenhower Turnbull. His father was a 3-star general, and he had to go to Vietnam. He was a conscientious objector, so he faked his own death and came back and hit the roads in America on a Harley. And it was a fantastic story. It kept everybody going and stuff like that. There was no Republican element in it or anything like that. It was a lovely story. And everybody loved it, you know. And it was things like this, and he could tell our stories. His poetry was amazing. His singing, and as I say, like that. And he encouraged speaking the Irish language, teaching it and speaking it at all times. The blocks was like and you were learning Irish language, and you were writing it on the wall, I guess. Was writing it down and you were memorising it and stuff. Sometimes we would have used the corner of the metal part of the rosary piece to write if you hadn't got the wee pencils or stuff that was smuggled in. You know, you wrote out the Irish and you memorised it, and then you rubbed it off and stuff like that. Of course, when you move sail during the wing shift, it would have been gone when you come back. It would have been blasted off the wall. But this is how we learned, and we learned speaking it and making up stories and stuff like this. Bobby encouraged all this. Bobby knew that the thing to do was to keep men's minds occupied at all times. Well, the blanket protest came about because of the attempt to criminalise the Republican struggle. That in March 1976, Roy Mason decided that prisoners were no longer political. There was guys still in the cages and long cash, because they came in before that date, or if you had been charged before that date, at a later time you went to the cages. But if you were charged after that date, you were a criminal, common criminal. You had to wear the prison uniform and do prison work. And when I came in September 1976, the Kieran Nugent had started the blanket protest. He had refused to wear that. He was the first blanket man, and they gave him a prison uniform, which was like denim, dark denims and stuff like that. And he insisted you need to nail it to me back. And they gave him a blanket and the towel, and they put the blanket around him, and he became the first blanket man. And it was a protest against the criminalisation. We weren't going to accept the tag as criminals, or we weren't going to wear a prison uniform. And Kieran Nugent started, and he was slowly followed by other guys who went on after him, and then it became about 300, maybe at a time 350 men. I don't think it went much beyond that, you know, but that's how it became, because we had nothing else to wear, only this blanket. The blanket was covered us at night, but during the day it also covered us. And it got to the stage during the protest, when we started out, we were in a metal bed with a sponge mattress, with a locker and with stuff like that. But as the beatings and the hammerings and everything continued, and especially when the dark came up from the cages and joined the protest, we escalated it, smashed the windows, smashed the furniture, and we were left with sponge mattresses, sleeping on the floor on sponge mattresses. And the thing about lying on a concrete floor on a sponge mattress is condensation. And it meant at night, when you got up the next morning, you had to put them up against the wall to try and dry them out. The only thing that saved us was the heating pipes. 2 heating pipes were running along the wall below the window. And these mattresses, as I say, became rather wet. But that was what we existed on. You know, sometimes you wonder how we done it.
And the blanket protest turned into the dirty protest.
Well, we wouldn't call it the dirty protest, the no wash protest, you know, as we would, and no others call it dirty, but we don't call it, we call it the no wash protest, you know, because that's what it was. We refused to wash, refused to clean, and then we started putting this treatment on the walls, you know.
I mean, when you were asked to do that, did you feel disgusted? What did you feel like? Naturally,
you know, you have to imagine yourself, like, when doing this, like, you naturally we felt disgusted and stuff like that. But we also believed that the screws couldn't cope with us. They couldn't cope with the smell. They couldn't cope with having to go on these cells like that. You know, I would deter them and stuff like that. But like us, they eventually got used to it too. You know, when they would come along with things. See, they began to fire a very strong bleach into the cells and stuff. And this was really affecting guys. You know, there was a lot of horrific things went on. They stuck hoses on the door and left guys standing all night on puddles of water through the freezing cold nights. You know, they were doing things like that to try and break us. You know, whereas we thought that putting their own screaming on the walls, you know, this would hasten the end of the protest. And therefore, you get used to it. It's amazing what you get used to. People can get used to anything, living in a concrete box day after day, and you know, you can get used to it. It becomes commonplace, you know.
And could you get used to the maggots crawling over you?
Yes, you get used to them too. We got used to the maggots. We started to feed them the birds. You know, it was for my entertainment, feeding the maggots to the birds. But it was, at the start, disgusting when you seen all this. See, the rotten food that we didn't eat was thrown on the corner, and that began to pile up, and then the maggots began to come out of it.
So, how long did you do the protest for?
I went on the protest after I was sentenced in June 1977, and I stayed on it until it ended after the hunger strike in October 1981, about 4 years and 4 months.
Wow.
You know, there was guys on it a lot longer than that. You know. And there was guys, you know, coming and going, you know, but that was, I ended up serving 9 years out of a 12-year sentence, but then it was half remission, you know, so I done an extra 3 years in jail. All the other guys done the same, like, done extra time because of the protests and other things.